What happens when the most feared man in New York discovers the woman he's about to marry is a monster? When Dylan walked into his mother's room, he expected peace. Instead, he witnessed a betrayal so deep it took a penniless maid committing the unthinkable to stop it. To the outside world, Dylan Castiglione was a ghost story businessmen told each other to enforce compliance. At 32, he was the undisputed head of the Castiglione syndicate, a man whose quiet nod could level city blocks or sway a gubernatorial election in New York. He was cold, calculated, and violently protective of the two things he valued above all else, his bloodline and his honor. But behind the high limestone walls of his Long Island estate, Dylan was a man slowly drowning in grief. His mother, Rosa, the matriarch who had single-handedly kept the family together during the bloody cartel wars of the late 90s, was fading. Early-onset Alzheimer's had stolen the fierce, vibrant woman she used to be, replacing her with a fragile ghost who often woke up screaming, trapped in memories of a past she couldn't outrun. Dylan's life was a delicate balancing act. On one side, he was managing a volatile port dispute with the ruthless Calabrese faction. On the other, he was preparing for a high society wedding to Sylvia Harrington. Sylvia was the striking blonde daughter of Arthur Harrington, a billionaire political fixer whose connections in the Senate were exactly what Dylan needed to legitimize his family's offshore holdings. It wasn't a marriage of love, it was a tactical merger. But Sylvia played the part flawlessly. In front of Dylan, she was the picture of grace, softly holding Rosa's frail hands, bringing her tea, and assuring Dylan that she would care for his mother as her own. "You worry too much, Dom," Sylvia would purr, adjusting his silk tie before he left for the city. "Your mother is safe with me. I'll make sure her nurses are on top of everything. Go handle your business." Dylan believed her. He had no reason not to. But Dylan wasn't the only one watching. Fiona Jenkins was practically invisible in the sprawling 20-room mansion, which was exactly how she needed it to be. At 24, Fiona was a former nursing student whose life had been derailed when her father racked up a crippling 6-figure debt at an underground casino. That casino was run by Louis Vanzetti, Dylan's underboss. To keep her father's legs unbroken, Fiona had been forced to drop out of school and take a job as a live-in maid at the Castiglione estate, her wages garnished directly by the syndicate. She was terrified of Dylan, terrified of his men, and desperate to keep her head down, do her work, and survive. But Fiona had a weakness. She couldn't turn off her compassion. Because she was assigned to clean the West Wing, where Rosa's suites were located, Fiona saw the things the security cameras missed. She saw the heavy oak doors close, and she saw the mask slip from Sylvia Harrington's beautiful face. It started with small, cruel things. When Dylan was away in Manhattan, Sylvia would dismiss Dr. Sterling and the private nurses early, claiming she wanted bonding time with her future mother-in-law. Once alone, the sweet, doting fiancée vanished. Fiona, dusting the hallway corridors, would hear the sharp, venomous tone bleeding through the cracks of the door. "Stop crying, you pathetic old bat," Sylvia's voice hissed one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Fiona had frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She peeked through the slightly ajar door. Rosa was trembling in her wheelchair, tears spilling down her wrinkled cheeks as she reached for a framed photograph of Dylan's late father. Sylvia snatched the photo away, her manicured nails digging into the silver frame. "I said stop. You're giving me a migraine. You think I actually want to spend my afternoons babysitting a brain-dead antique? The second I get the ring on my finger, you are going into a state facility in Connecticut, and I am turning this depressing wing into a walk-in closet." Fiona pressed her hand over her mouth, stifling a gasp. She watched in horror as Sylvia shoved the wheelchair roughly toward the window, leaving Rosa facing the bleak grey storm outside, completely ignoring the elderly woman's soft whimpers. For weeks, this secret torment continued. Fiona was paralyzed by fear. Who would believe her? She was a debtor, a maid practically owned by the Mafia. Sylvia was the untouchable daughter of a political titan. If Fiona spoke up, Sylvia would simply brand her a liar. Dylan Castiglione wasn't a man who held HR meetings. He was a man who buried liars in the foundations of high-rises. Fiona knew that if she crossed Sylvia, her father would be killed, and she would disappear. So, Fiona did the only thing she could. She secretly tried to mitigate the damage. When Sylvia intentionally forgot to give Rosa her afternoon blankets, Fiona sneaked them in. When Sylvia pinched Rosa's arm, leaving faint, yellowish bruises that she blamed on clumsiness, Fiona would apply soothing arnica cream when she was changing the bedsheets. Fiona began spending her meager free time sitting on the floor by Rosa's bed, reading to her in a soft voice, holding her hand when the dementia terrors took hold. Rosa, lost in the fog of her mind, began calling Fiona "mi angelo," my angel. Fiona's silent rebellion was risky, but she couldn't abandon the old woman. The tension in the house was a coiled spring, wound tighter with every passing day as the wedding approached. Sylvia's impatience with Rosa grew more volatile, her cruelty bolder. She felt invincible. She believed the mansion was her kingdom, and that Dylan's blind spot for her was absolute. She was wrong. The turning point happened on a sweltering Friday in late July. Dylan was supposed to be in Chicago for a 3-day summit with the Midwest syndicates. He wasn't scheduled to return until Sunday evening. Knowing the master of the house was 1,000 miles away, Sylvia granted the entire nursing staff a paid weekend off. "I'll be taking personal care of Rosa this weekend," Sylvia had announced to the head nurse with a sickeningly sweet smile. "We girls need some quality time." Fiona felt a cold dread settle in her stomach as she watched the nurses' cars pull out of the gated driveway. She was the only staff member left in the West Wing, tasked with polishing the antique mahogany furniture. What Sylvia didn't know was that the Chicago summit had gone south immediately. Suspecting an ambush, Dylan and his underboss, Louis, had walked out of the sit-down after only 10 minutes. Furious and paranoid, Dylan boarded his private jet and flew back to New York 2 days early. He arrived at the estate unannounced, his mood black, his security detail moving like shadows behind him. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He just wanted to sit quietly with his mother. Back in the West Wing, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rosa was having a particularly bad day. The dementia was severe. She didn't recognize her surroundings and was crying out for her late husband in panicked Italian. "Basta! Shut up!" Sylvia shrieked. Fiona, carrying a pile of fresh linens, froze in the corridor. The screaming was coming from the sunroom. "I cannot deal with this today," Sylvia yelled. Fiona dropped the linens and crept toward the open archway of the sunroom. Inside, the scene made her blood run cold. Rosa was hyperventilating, her fragile hands clutching a porcelain teacup. In her panicked state, Rosa's hands shook violently, and the hot chamomile tea sloshed over the rim, splashing directly onto Sylvia's custom beige silk trousers. Sylvia let out an ear-piercing scream of rage. "Look what you did, you stupid senile bitch! Do you know how much this costs?" "Scusa, scusa," Rosa wept, cowering, trying to wipe the stain with her bare hands. "Don't touch me!" Sylvia slapped Rosa's hands away so hard that the porcelain cup shattered onto the hardwood floor. Fiona's breath hitched. She should walk away. She should run to the kitchen and pretend she heard nothing. Her father's life flashed before her eyes. Louis Vanzetti's cold stare, the heavy iron gates of the estate. But then she looked at Rosa, the proud, fiercely loving mother Dylan always spoke of, now trembling like a beaten dog, bleeding slightly from where a shard of porcelain had grazed her wrist. Sylvia wasn't finished. Blinded by her narcissistic rage, she grabbed Rosa by the shoulders and yanked her half out of the wheelchair. "I'm going to lock you in the cellar until Sunday," Sylvia hissed, her face contorted into something demonic. "Let's see if the dark shuts you up." Sylvia raised her hand high, preparing to strike the elderly woman across the face. Fiona didn't think. Instinct, raw and terrifying, took over. She sprinted across the room. "Leave her alone," Fiona screamed. In a move that sealed her death warrant, the penniless maid threw her entire body weight into the billionaire's daughter. Fiona shoved Sylvia with such violent force that the blonde woman flew backward, her stiletto heel catching on the edge of the Persian rug. Sylvia crashed hard against a heavy oak bookshelf, books and decorative glass raining down around her with a deafening clatter. Silence violently snapped into the room. Fiona stood panting, positioning her small frame directly between the fallen socialite and the trembling old woman. Her hands were balled into fists, shaking uncontrollably. She had just assaulted the future wife of the Mafia boss. You dirty little rat," Sylvia gasped, holding her bruised shoulder, her eyes wide with shock and venom. "I'll kill you. Do you hear me? You're a dead woman. Dylan will have you cut into pieces." "She wasn't doing anything to you," Fiona fired back, tears of sheer adrenaline and terror spilling down her cheeks. "She's sick. How could you? What the hell is going on here?" The voice was low, gravelly, and deadly calm. It was a voice that commanded empires and ended lives. Fiona's heart stopped. She turned slowly. Standing in the doorway, drenched in rain from his unexpected arrival, was Dylan Castiglione. His dark eyes were fixed on the scene. The shattered porcelain, his mother bleeding and crying, Fiona standing like a shield, and his fiancée sprawled on the floor. Sylvia recovered in a fraction of a second. The demonic rage vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a mask of sheer, terrified victimhood. She forced tears to her eyes and let out a dramatic, breathless sob. "Dom! Oh my God, Dom! Thank God you're home!" Sylvia cried out, scrambling to her knees and pointing a manicured, trembling finger at Fiona. This psychotic girl just attacked us. Rosa spilled some tea, and the maid just snapped. She shoved me, and then she went after your mother." Fiona felt the floor open up beneath her. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered. She looked at Dylan. His expression was completely unreadable, a terrifying blank wall. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, blocking any chance of escape. "She's lying," Fiona whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring in her own ears. It was a pathetic defense against the word of a Harrington. "Mr. Castiglione, please. I swear on my life, she's lying." Dylan stepped into the room. The heavy thud of his leather shoes sounded like a judge's gavel. He walked past Fiona without even looking at her. He walked past his mother. He stopped directly in front of Sylvia, looking down at her as she continued to weep beautifully. Sylvia reached up, grabbing the fabric of Dylan's trousers. "Dom, you have to call your men. You have to get rid of her. She's dangerous." Fiona squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for Dylan to bark the order that would end her life. She braced herself for the impact of his men dragging her away. Instead, she heard a sound that made her open her eyes in shock. Dylan had knelt down, but he wasn't comforting Sylvia. He reached out and grabbed Sylvia's wrist, the one she had used to grab his mother, and squeezed it with terrifying, calculated pressure. "Sylvia," Dylan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, guttural whisper. "Do you think I built this empire by being blind?" Sylvia's fake tears stopped instantly. The color drained from her face. "Dom." "What? You're hurting me." Dylan slowly turned his head to look at a small, almost invisible black dome tucked discreetly into the carved molding of the ceiling. "I installed a secondary, offline, closed-circuit camera in this room 2 weeks ago," Dylan stated softly, "because my mother's bruises were in places she couldn't reach when she fell, and because I never trust a woman who smiles too much when she thinks she has all the power." Sylvia's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a freight train. He hadn't just walked in. He had been watching. Dylan stood up, releasing Sylvia's hand in disgust, as if she were a diseased animal. He turned his imposing gaze toward Fiona. The terrified maid backed up against the wheelchair, shaking like a leaf, fully expecting to still be punished for laying hands on a connected woman. Dylan looked at Fiona, then down at his mother, who was now clutching Fiona's apron like a lifeline. "Miss Jenkins," Dylan said, his tone shifting into something dangerously quiet. Yes, sir," Fiona choked out. "Take my mother to her bedroom, clean her wrist, lock the door from the inside." He didn't blink. "And do not come out no matter what you hear." The heavy oak door of the master bedroom clicked shut, and Fiona turned the brass deadbolt with shaking, bloodless fingers. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. She leaned her back against the solid wood, sliding down until she hit the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. In the center of the room, Rosa Castiglione sat on the edge of the sprawling canopy bed, miraculously calm. The terrifying episode had passed, leaving the elderly woman in a state of quiet confusion. She looked down at her bleeding wrist, then over to Fiona. "Mi Angelo," Rosa whispered softly, tilting her head. "Why are you crying?" Fiona forced a broken smile, quickly wiping the hot tears from her cheeks. She crawled over to the ensuite bathroom, retrieved a first aid kit, and gently began cleaning the shallow cut on Rosa's arm with antiseptic. "It's nothing, Mrs. Castiglione. Just a little storm outside. We're safe in here." But they weren't safe. Fiona knew what kind of man Dylan Castiglione was. You didn't embarrass him. You didn't assault his soon-to-be wife, no matter the justification, without facing the brutal machinery of his syndicate. She waited for the sound of heavy boots. She waited for the doorknob to rattle. Instead, a chilling, absolute silence fell over the West Wing. Downstairs in the sunroom, Dylan stood over Sylvia Harrington like a reaper. The facade of the untouchable socialite had completely shattered. Sylvia was hyperventilating, her perfectly styled blonde hair clinging to her damp forehead as she scrambled backward against the broken porcelain. "Dom, listen to me," Sylvia stammered, her voice shrill with panic. "You're taking this out of context. The old woman is out of her mind. She's violent. I was trying to restrain her for her own good." "My father, your father," Dylan interrupted, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room, "is Arthur Harrington, a man who launders campaign funds through a shell corporation in Delaware called Apex Holdings. A man who currently has $12 million sitting in an undeclared account in the Cayman Islands, an account that my syndicate set up for him." Sylvia froze, her eyes wide. Dylan slowly pulled a sleek, encrypted smartphone from his tailored suit jacket. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quietest men in the underworld were always the deadliest. "You thought you were untouchable because of his Senate connections," Dylan continued, his dark eyes devoid of any human warmth. "You thought I was marrying you because I needed him. You have it backward, Sylvia. Your father is in debt to the Calabrese family. He came to me on his knees last December, begging for a bailout, so the Calabrese hitters wouldn't carve him up. This wedding was a concession. It was a favor. Sylvia's jaw trembled. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She wasn't a queen stepping onto a throne. She was a pawn being removed from the board. I tolerated you, Dylan said, taking a slow step forward, because my mother smiled when you were around. I thought you brought her peace in her final years, but you brought her hell. Dom, please, Sylvia sobbed, genuinely terrified now. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. The dementia, it's so stressful. Get up. Sylvia scrambled to her feet, wincing as she put weight on her bruised shoulder. Louis, Dylan called out softly. From the shadows of the hallway corridor, Louis Vanzetti emerged. The underboss was a towering, scarred man who looked more like a heavyweight enforcer than a financial strategist. He chewed on a toothpick, his eyes locked onto Sylvia with predatory amusement. Yeah, boss? Louis rumbled. Escort Miss Harrington off my property, Dylan ordered, not breaking eye contact with Sylvia. She is leaving with the clothes on her back. Anything she brought into this house will be burned in the incinerator by morning. If she attempts to contact me, or if her father breathes a word of this to the press, release the Apex Holdings ledger to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You can't do this, Sylvia shrieked, a desperate, feral edge entering her voice. My family will ruin you. My brother Preston will kill you, Dylan. Louis chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He grabbed Sylvia by her upper arm with a grip like a steel vise. Preston is a cokehead who owes my bookies 50 grand, sweetheart. Walk. As Louis dragged the screaming, thrashing socialite out of the sunroom and through the grand foyer, Dylan stood perfectly still in the wreckage. He looked at the shattered teacup. He looked at the few drops of his mother's blood staining the polished hardwood floor. His chest tightened with a lethal, burning guilt. He had built an empire to protect his family, and he had let a monster walk right through the front door. And the only person who had stood between the monster and his mother was a 24-year-old maid whose father he was currently extorting. Dylan took a deep breath, adjusting his cuffs. He turned on his heel and walked toward the West Wing stairs. It was time to deal with Fiona Jenkins. Upstairs, Fiona had just finished tucking Rosa into bed. The elderly woman had succumbed to exhaustion, her breathing finally deep and even. Fiona sat on the floor beside the bed, staring blankly at the wall, waiting for the inevitable. When the heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed in the hallway, Fiona squeezed her eyes shut. Click. The doorknob turned. The door was locked, but Fiona knew that wouldn't stop him. A second later, the sharp sound of a master key sliding into the lock made her jump. The deadbolt snapped back, and the heavy oak door swung open. Dylan Castiglione stepped into the dimly lit room. He looked immense in the shadows, his tailored dark suit emphasizing the sheer, intimidating breadth of his shoulders. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. Fiona immediately scrambled to her feet, backing away until her spine hit the cold plaster of the wall. She kept her head down, her hands trembling at her sides. "I'm sorry," Fiona blurted out, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. "I know I shouldn't have touched her. I know who she is. I know who you are. Punish me, do whatever you have to do. But please, Mr. Castiglione, please don't hurt my father. He's sick. The debt isn't his fault. He has a gambling addiction. I'll work for you for the rest of my life for free. Just don't kill him." Dylan stopped in the center of the room. He looked at the terrified girl. Her cheap maid's uniform was wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her face was pale with sheer panic. Yet an hour ago, This same girl had thrown herself at a woman twice her size to protect an old lady she had no obligation to care for. "Look at me, Fiona," Dylan said quietly. Fiona flinched at the sound of her first name on his lips. Slowly she raised her head, her wide, tear-filled green eyes meeting his dark, calculating gaze. "Thomas Jenkins owes my underground casino $240,000, Dylan stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Fiona let out a stifled sob, nodding. "I know. I'm trying to pay it off. I know it's not enough." "As of 5 minutes ago," Dylan interrupted smoothly, "that debt is erased." Fiona stopped breathing. She stared at him, sure she had misheard. "Whoa, what?" Dylan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment. He held it out to her. Fiona hesitated, then took a shaky step forward and plucked it from his fingers. It was a promissory note, signed by her father. Across the front, stamped in heavy red ink, was the word, "Paid in full." I don't understand," Fiona whispered, her mind reeling. "My world is built on loyalty, Miss Jenkins," Dylan said, stepping closer to the bed and looking down at his sleeping mother. His expression softened, just for a fraction of a second, revealing the immense grief hiding beneath the ruthless Mafia boss. "I employ 200 men in this city, men who carry guns, men who claim they would die for me. Yet, when a threat entered my home and went after the only thing I have left in this world, those men were entirely blind." He turned back to Fiona, his gaze intense and piercing. "You were the only one who saw. You were the only one who acted. You put your life, and your father's life, on the line to protect my mother from a woman you believed was going to be the queen of this syndicate." Dylan took a slow step toward her, closing the distance between them. "That kind of loyalty cannot be bought. It is rarely found, and it is heavily rewarded." Fiona looked down at the paper in her hands. The crushing, suffocating weight that had ruled her life for the past year was suddenly gone. She let out a gasp, her knees buckling slightly as the adrenaline finally crashed. Before she could hit the floor, Dylan's hands shot out, gripping her arms firmly and holding her upright. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he was known for. "You are no longer a maid in this house," Dylan commanded softly, refusing to let her look away from him. "Your father's legs will remain unbroken. Tomorrow, I am setting up a private trust in your name. You will be my mother's exclusive, personal companion. You will have a driver, a security detail, and whatever salary you deem appropriate." "Mr. Castiglione, I can't ask for that," Fiona breathed, entirely overwhelmed. "You didn't ask. I commanded it," Dylan replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching the corner of his lips. "And when the head of the Castiglione family gives you a decree, Fiona, the only acceptable answer is yes, boss." The following weeks sent shockwaves through the New York elite. The Castiglione-Harrington wedding was abruptly cancelled. Rumors swirled in the underground that Arthur Harrington had suddenly retired from politics and fled to Europe, his financial assets mysteriously frozen by federal investigators. The Calabrese family tried to capitalize on the broken alliance, but Dylan crushed their port operations with a sudden, overwhelming display of force, solidifying his absolute control over the city. But the biggest mystery to the outside world was the woman who began appearing at Dylan's side. She wasn't a socialite. She didn't come from political royalty. But when Dylan Castiglione walked into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel for the annual syndicate gala, the room fell dead silent. He was wearing his signature tailored tuxedo, radiating lethal authority, and holding his arm wearing a stunning emerald green gown that caught the light, was Fiona Jenkins. She stood tall, no longer the terrified girl hiding in the corridors. When a rival boss dared to look at her with disrespect, Dylan didn't say a word. He simply shifted his stance, his hand resting casually over the concealed weapon in his jacket, and the rival boss quickly averted his eyes. Fiona had done the unthinkable. She had defied a monster, risked everything for a stranger, and in doing so, she had accidentally conquered the heart of the most dangerous man in New York. She had walked into the lion's den as a penniless captive, and she walked out as the untouchable queen of the syndicate. Did Fiona make the right choice, standing up to the Mafia boss's fiancé? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with your fellow drama lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired romance and suspense stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a plot twist. Comment your favorite moment below.